this I feel like, and Dan, Ryan, Joe, I feel like you all have, schooled me enough at that there isn't a perfect system out here for data loss prevention. Well, why is that? Like, what's wrong with it? Why can't we do it?
I think that there's a couple of factors that make the data loss prevention a difficult challenge. This really was not something considered with the basic operating systems when they were first developed, meaning that there's a lot of different types of files where log trails and audit trails are hard to follow. But on top of that, there tends to be tens of thousands of files, and tracking where they go, understanding which ones are potential threats almost always comes down to a data science approach and looking for anomalies of who's touching a file and who shouldn't be touching a file. And then once a file is sent via email or Slack to some external party, then you've lost complete control over it with most networks. I actually, there's not too many data loss prevention solutions I can think of that ensures that you have to like decrypt the file individually every time once it's outside the network. On top of that, humans find lots of ways to work around data loss prevention. And it's somewhat controversial in some cases, depending on how it's perceived and understood by the people in the company. It can very easily start to look like, oh, well, you're tracking everything I'm doing and whatnot, which depending on the company might be quite difficult to deal with. So yeah, I mean, data loss prevention is a hard problem for a variety of different reasons, I would say. And unless I don't think there's a magic bullet solution that addresses them all equally well in a way where there wouldn't be some workaround or mitigation to, some untracked file that you've pushed all these files into and now you're sending out across the network. So yeah, that would be my first thought there.
Yeah, I think kind of like vulnerability management, this is kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's hard, and hard things generally get put to the back of the list, like every list, all lists, right? So DLP, while there are, I think, several ways that you can go about identifying data loss and doing your best to prevent it. Like you said, I don't know of any silver bullet. There are some vendors out there that have some really good solutions around this. But at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be one particular thing. You look at, well, we could set rate limits on our firewall to set alarms if too much goes out from one source or something like that. But of course, the threat actors are going to throttle that. They throttle how much they're taking out at one time from one place. So there's ways around that too. You can block certain cloud providers that host like Dropbox, right? That host file solutions where the other end, block those on the firewall. You can do some things like that if you know that your organization doesn't use them. But a lot of times, that comes back to bite you when sales or marketing needs X, Y, or Z presentation from said thing immediately, right? Yep. You're welcome, Alex. Yes, I'm completely blaming sales and marketing.
It's fair. It's warranted.
Right. And so I think there are a lot of different ways to kind of skin that cat, but but none of them are a silver bullet, and it really takes an effort to understand where the data is. And then of course they're trying to find what's really important, right? In this, when you're talking about data loss prevention, find the stuff that's really important and really put the controls around that stuff. Like, don't try to do data loss prevention across everything on your entire network that's ever existed ever, right? That's not going to be feasible, but you can put controls around the very specific areas where this critical data is, and then on top of that, try to and use encryption to the best of your abilities to be able to say, if the data did get out, that even though it left the building, it is, you know, it may still be encrypted. So trying to encrypt things at rest, or you know, being able to just generally use encryption so that even if it gets out, it's difficult. It becomes difficult for the attacker to use on the other side, or they have to execute multiple attacks to be able to get to that data.
Yep, certainly.
Encryption was gonna be my
Documentation.
number one.
Was that?
Before my VPN died and I had to reset, I was gonna say encryption. It would be my number one recommendation for you know, some type of data loss prevention. Like you said, there is no perfect solution, but encryption is really good because you can encrypt things at rest on disk. You can do full disk encryption. You can also select the option to encrypt your cloud storage. So like all of these cloud providers usually have an option where you can do encryption in transit and at rest. That is going to help, you know, if you can't access the data without the decryption keys. So, you know, if the attacker, like we've seen it a lot in our incident management team, where we go to respond to an incident, almost every time it's a ransomware attack, it actually started with data theft. And we see a lot of data that's not encrypted that gets stolen and now gets used as a part of that extortion that, you know, we're going to leak your data, we're going to sell your data. That's a big part of modern attacks that we're seeing is very common right now.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things to comment on here. I think we said a lot of, you know, like, how are you going to do this? Can't solve this problem. It's a really difficult problem. It doesn't mean that it's not worth taking an approach.
Sure.
It all starts with, you know, I guess you would say intellectual property review, right? You want to know what parts of your network, what parts of your data, where your file stores are the most important and critical to your business. And then trying to enforce principles of least privilege, right? The people who have access to that, the more critical those pieces of information to your business are, the least privileged, like, that should be granted to those documents. And that can create, you know, challenges in other ways. But that is certainly the most direct approach to approaching data loss prevention. That all being said, you know, as an attacker, if I have read access to a file and I don't want it to get seen going across the network, I'm just going to encode it in a different encoding that I can read off of the disk and send it away. So definitely encryption is important because, yeah, encoding a file into a different form of text is very easy. And some people here might know base 64 encoding, super easy to do. And on top of it, if you block me, then I'll just re-encode it with an extra bit in there. And
so Ryan, my number two was going to be behavior analytics.
Yeah, behavioral analysis. Yeah.
And then if you can actually do an IR based off the behavior, like things that flag, like, hey, why is this user encoding files into something base 64? That's a behavior that could trigger.
That seems odd.
That would be one. Yeah.
Yeah. Janice, the accountant, I didn't know she knew base 64.
Yeah, exactly.
Part one, trigger the behavior. Part two, can you respond to it? Like if you even thought, and I think back to Sony, if you remember the Sony attack, huge, right? The attackers set up a peer-to-peer torrent network inside of Sony, right? Like that could have flagged, like, hey, why is some user setting up a torrent network inside of our network? And then why are they sending gigabytes of data out to torrent? You know, that could have been a flag, but then you have to have the ability to actually go investigate.
Yeah.
Terabytes, you know, like that would have been a spike. If someone was monitoring network traffic, they definitely would have seen a spike of, you know, gigabytes or terabytes of data leaving the network.